regardless of where you are feeling on the mountaintop or in the lowest valley, God is meeting us and needing to worship and tremble and faithful. So I'm going to invite you to stand as we worship in this this prayer aloud together. So let's stand and read this together. Dear Lord, we gather in your presence today with open hearts and eyes, ready to worship and praise your holy name. We ask that you bless this time of worship so that we may be uplifted and inspired by your presence. Fill us with your love and grace and help us to honor you in all that we do. May our worship be pleasing to you, and may we be transformed by the power of the Spirit. We offer this prayer in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. We're going to begin worship this morning by singing with me on the Everlasting Arms, number 1, verses 1.
Oh yeah, that's how it's going. Because we only have the microphones going. Because if you don't hear everybody talking everywhere.
Yeah, but like it's just we have to Hannah talks and it sounds so
It could be her.
tinny because now it doesn't have that.
It could also be because she's so close to the microphone. It works in moments of not being worried.
Such a privilege to get to lean on Jesus' everlasting arms and to take all of our prayers, all our griefs, all our sins, all our suffering to God in prayer. So let's do that as we sing What a Friend We Have in Jesus' name.
It just sounds really bad. It just sounds really bad. Like I don't looking up saying that. I said it sounds bad.
comfortable position. Perhaps just focus on your breathing. Breathing in and out. And to take a posture with your hands of receiving. Maybe that's just them open on your lap, feather in front of your heart, but to take a posture, whatever feels right, you be in an attitude of receiving from God this morning. And I'm just going to speak these words over us, and each time one word to call out, how we could just be still and know that God is God, and to allow God to speak to us, to give us something this morning as we enter into this posture of receiving. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know that I. Be still and know that. Be still and know. Be still and be still. Be the oceans rise above this roar. I will soar with you above the storm. Father, you are king above the flood. I will be still, knowing I rest my soul in Christ when the oceans rise above this roar. I will soar with you above the storm. Father, you are king above the flood. I will be still. When the oceans rise above this roar, I will soar with you above the storm. Father, you are king above the flood. I will be still. I will be still. The stillness of God's presence among us. We get to receive and hear God's voice speaking into our lives, God's spirit that sometimes calls us out of the oceans to do hard things. So as we continue to worship God, take whatever posture is most comfortable, either seated or standing or rising, open your doors to allow God to speak to you this morning. All down on the water, great unknown. And keep my eyes from the waves when oceans rise. So rest in your embrace, for I am praise abounds in deepest waters. Sovereign hand, be my guide. Lead me where the fear surrounds me. Never fail, and you won't start now. So I will call upon your name and keep my eyes from the waves. When oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace. For I am yours, you are mine. Lead me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters wherever you would call me. Take me deeper than my feet could ever wander, and my faith will be made stronger in the presence of my Savior. Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters wherever you would call me. Take me deeper than my feet could ever wander, and my faith will be made stronger in the presence of my Savior. Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters wherever you would call me. Take me deeper than my feet could ever wander, and my faith will be made stronger in the presence of my Savior. I will call upon your name and keep my eyes above the waves. When oceans rise, my soul will rest in your embrace. For I am yours, and you are mine. That your spirit does lead us, that we can trust, that no matter what oceans we face in our lives, no matter what storms we face, that you are with us. So God, lead us, guide us in the path of your salvation, knowing that your goodness and your faithfulness will never fail us. God, continue to speak to us this morning, that in your presence, and the powerful name of Jesus we pray. My sophomore year at Messiah was a pretty tough year. I was taking some of the hardest classes I've ever taken in my life, and I was also working as a work study for one of my professors, and I became a brand new resident assistant to a floor of 40 freshman girls. So to say I was busy was maybe a bit of an understatement that year, and I learned a lot. that whole year during my sophomore year at Messiah. But at the end of that year, I had to stay an extra week on campus because as a resident assistant, part of our role was to help other students check out of the building at the end of the year, make sure they hadn't broken anything and got all their belongings to go home with them. So I was doing this process at the end of the year, and as I was going through the different dorm rooms, I started to develop a cold. And I first thought, okay, it's just the dust or the dirty dorm rooms that I'm walking through and helping residents move out. But as the week continued, I got sicker and sicker to the point when it was finally time that I could go home for the summer. I wasn't able to drive the full 4 hours home and had to call my parents to meet me halfway. I got pretty sick that summer and I just spent a lot of it in bed and learned a lot of lessons in that process. But one of the lessons that still stands out to me today is that sometimes in our lives, it's more important to receive than to give. This summer, we've been journeying through this Who Are Your People sermon series, and we have talked about these essential relationships in our lives. And hopefully, you've been able to focus on different relationships that you have, thank God for the people in your life, or maybe ask God to bring new relationships into your life, or to be more intentional about the relationships you do have. So first of all, thank you for sticking with me this summer, as this was quite a lengthy series, and thank you to Amy Amy's in the back today, for illustrating this so beautifully for us. But throughout the different weeks of this summer, we talked about 10 different biblical characters and 10 different relationships in our lives. Of Nathan, our editor, Jonathan, our true friend, Jethro, our bookkeeper, Timothy, our apprentice, Barnabas, our encourager, Peter, our mentor, Deborah, who covers our backs, Zacchaeus, the social outcast, Rhoda, our little one. And today, as we end this series, we get to talk about who is your Lydia, or who is your VIP, your very important person. So hopefully this series has just really helped you focus on the relationships in your life, to realize we don't walk this journey alone, but we're designed to walk it together, to give and receive from one another. So who is your Lydia? A Lydia in your life is like a sponsor or a partner or a patron in your life. They're willing to put their money where your mouth is. They're willing to support your mission and vision in life and to give often generously to you. And many of you in this room have experienced Lydias in your life, right? Maybe when you graduated from high school or got your first car or went to college or got married or bought the first home or had your first child, right? Hopefully there were people in your life that showed up to generously bless you. Now, some of you may know what it's like to receive from a Lydia, but some of us may also have the experience where we have denied gifts from Lydia in our life. Maybe for our own pride or all sorts of different reasons. We said, no, thank you. I don't actually want your gift. Don't bless me generously in my life. I heard a story actually recently of a pastor who did this. The story goes, the pastor was serving in Rochester, New York, and his office was just inside the side entrance of the church. So almost everybody who entered the church would stop by his office as they came in that side entrance. And one particular woman, her name was Estelle, would come into the pastor's office almost every single morning to ask for a hug before she went down the hall to the kitchen, where different ladies of the church had kept some extra food and clothes for her. There were rumors about Estelle in the church of maybe she was homeless, maybe she was renting a room. Nobody really knew, but every morning almost she would come into the pastor's office and she'd look slightly disheveled, maybe slightly pungent, but get the hug from the pastor and then proceed to the kitchen. One morning, Estelle walked in for her morning hug with a huge smile on her face. She told the pastor, "You're going to get a phone call this afternoon, and it's going to change your life." And the pastor didn't quite know what to think about it, but he gives Estelle a hug and she continues down to the kitchen. Sure enough, that afternoon, the pastor gets a phone call from Estelle's attorney. And Estelle's attorney begins to tell the pastor, "Sir, as you know, Estelle was a very frugal woman, but she has saved a lot of money over the course of her life to the tune of $1 million. And she wants to leave all of that to you." And the pastor was shocked. He had no idea Estelle had this kind of money. He was overwhelmed by her generosity, and he immediately wanted to refuse the gift because he's like, "No, she can't give it to me. She's got to give it to the church. I'm not the only one that's helped her here. The whole church has really ministered to her and supported her." And so the pastor's like, "She can't give me this money. She's got to give it to the church." And the attorney's like, "Well, that's fine, but you got to take it up with Estelle." So the next morning, Estelle comes in, beaming from ear to ear, to talk with the pastor, knowing the news that he'd received. And the pastor looks at Estelle and says, "I can't accept said, you've got to give it to the church. You can't give it to me, Estelle. It will ruin me. You have to give it to the church. And Estelle ran out of the pastor's office in tears. 3 months later, Estelle died. She left $25,000 to her newspaper boy, $50,000 to one person who had spoke to her once on the street, $70,000 to a person who didn't even know who Estelle was, and the rest she left to her at home. A fortune was whittled away, all because the pastor couldn't receive the good gift. That Estelle wanted to bless him, wanted to start a ministry through him and believe in the work of God that God was calling him to, but he was not willing to receive this gift from Olivia. So we're going to talk a little bit this morning about who is Lydia, what is her story, and who are the Lydias in our life that show us sometimes it's more important to receive than to give. So Lydia's story is recorded for us in Acts chapter 16, beginning in verse 13. On the Sabbath, we left the city and went down along the river, where we had heard there was to be a prayer meeting. We took our place with the women who had gathered there and talked with them. One woman, Lydia, was from Thyatira and a dealer in expensive textiles, known to be a God-fearing woman. As she listened with intensity to what was being said, the master gave her a trusting heart, and she believed. After she was baptized, along with everyone else in the household, she said in a surge of hospitality, "If you are confident that I am in this with you, and believe that the Master truly, truly, come home with me and be my guest." We hesitated, but she would not take no for an answer. Lydia is this prominent businesswoman who grew up in Thyatira, the center of the textile industry of that time. But she moves to Philippi to set up her business there, which is where Paul runs into her. And Lydia is a dealer in purple cloth. And this is a big deal because purple is very expensive clothing at the time that Lydia was alive. Why purple was so expensive is you had to harvest a Murex shellfish from the ocean and squeeze it drop by drop to get the purple dye to make purple clothes. So Lydia is not making clothes that you and I would buy at Target or Walmart. She's making like Saks Fifth Avenue, Louis Vuitton, Gucci level clothes that only the rich and powerful, only those who are at the top of society can't even afford to buy and to wear. So purple was a sign of providence and wealth in the community. So here's Lydia, probably wearing purple herself as this successful businesswoman, and she runs into Paul, this traveling missionary who's definitely not wearing purple. And he shows up in her life, tells her about Jesus, and it changes her life forever. That she receives this message from him, and the scripture says that she and her whole household were baptized, which leads some of us to believe that perhaps Lydia was even the head of her household, this very prominent, powerful woman in her community. And we know that Lydia was a mover and a shaker and offers her home and a gift of hospitality to the church there in Philippi together. That the church begins to gather in Lydia's home. She begins to help lead the church there. Her house is a place of hospitality, hosting people like Luke and Silas and Paul and Peter, that some of them wouldn't even leave until they met with all the people that were a part of the church at Lydia's house. That she was this philanthropist willing to generously bless the early church. And so Lydia reminds us that sometimes we need to be willing to receive from people in our lives and not just give. I think this is a really important spiritual lesson for us. Because if you think about our relationship with God, God is always the giver in our lives. God is giving us good gifts. God's role is to give us gifts in our lives. Our role is to receive. That we do the receiving and God does the giving. And for us to claim we don't want to receive, we always want to be the giver, is to actually declare war on God and to say we prefer God's role instead of our own. That we have to be willing to also receive and not just give. I mean, think about Jesus. In Jesus' life and ministry, he's roaming around and he's often receiving from others. Jesus is never the host of the party. He's never the one extending the hospitality. He's always on the receiving end of other people's hospitality. That we need to be willing to receive in our spiritual lives. It's an important role that we have to play. And this impacts our spiritual life as well as our relationships with others. I heard a story about Greg Paul, who was this rock composer and musician who took his music to the streets of Toronto, Canada. And his music on the streets of Toronto actually turned into a ministry where he gathered together some of these people living in poverty on the streets of Toronto, and they started a community together that they called Sanctuary. And Sanctuary wasn't designed just to be an outreach to the poor. It was designed to be a community of the poor, surrounding the poor, made up of the poor. And Greg famously said that whenever upper or middle class people would come to Toronto to be a part of Sanctuary, he said one of the biggest barriers is that they had a difficulty learning to receive. They always wanted to show up and give something. They wanted to serve or give money. But he said before we let them do anything, we knew they needed to be able to receive from us as a part of this sanctuary community. That sometimes it's more important in our lives to receive than to give. And you see, I think the trouble often in the world is that we can receive from Lydia, who's wealthy, patrons in our lives, and we can also receive from people living on the margins or right on the poverty line. But there's so much we can receive from all different types of people all around us. The trouble with the world today isn't that the rich don't give money or items to the poor. That happens a lot. Thank goodness that people are very generous. And by rich, I'm saying any of us who live on more than $2 a day, which is probably all of us in this room. There are millions of people who live on less than that. But it's not that the rich don't give to the poor. It's that they don't know the poor. That they're not in relationship with people who are struggling to make things meet. It's one thing to give money to somebody in need or to give items to somebody in need. It's another thing to shake their hand or to give them a hug or to share their bathroom or to share a meal with them, to have a mutual relationship where people can give and receive from each other, that there's no power dynamics at play, but that we are all human together. We struggle with this today in the world, but so did the early church. In fact, Paul, when he's writing 1 Corinthians 11, said, hey, these wealthy members of the church, you need to wait for the day laborers to get off working so that they can come and be a part of the communion feast with you. Don't start eating without them. And when you walk by these people who are begging for food, invite them to join the feast as well. The trouble often with us today is that we're so distant often from people in need that we may go days without encountering somebody in need. But in the early church, literally, they were encountering people all the time. And Paul says, welcome them in to the feast as well, because you can receive from them too. So my question for you this morning is, who is your Lydia? Who are these very important people? Either super generous, wealthy people in your life, or super generous people on the margins or on the poverty line who can give to you in so many different ways if you're only open to receive. So it's my hope and prayer that you'll have a posture of receiving today from one another and from also from God. And so we did this earlier on in the service today, but I want us to look at this passage one more time, to take that posture of receiving, now hearing the word spoken over you this morning, of what you need to receive from God, or what gift does God want to give you today? That sometimes we're too busy running around serving others that we miss the gifts that God gives. So let's just take a posture of prayer one more time, to close your eyes, to take a posture of receiving, whatever that means, and to allow God to speak to us in the stillness and the silence, to give us whatever gift God has for us. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I. Be still and know that. Be still and know. Be still. Be still. God, we thank you that you are God, that your goodness overwhelms us. God, forgive us for the times when we try to take your role, always be good and never be good. Forgive us for the times when we're running around, such very crazy things that we don't need to run around. And see you. God, I thank you that you're always moving, working, and speaking into our lives, and help us to see that this week. Help us to receive and unwrap whatever good gift you have for each one of us. And we need to take that with us and cherish it this week. Allow it to continue to unfold in our lives. So God, we thank you for your goodness, for your faithfulness, for all the many gifts that you have given us in your kingdom. So we praise you together, join in the words that you would sung. God is still praying how the atmosphere. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. We invite Nancy to come back up, and I want to thank you that she's coming for your generous support of Hope Church. How you do allow us to give gifts to many people in this community and to serve many other people, and then how you also are faithful so we can receive God's love together. So thank you for your generosity, and we encourage you to continue to support Hope Church. There are ways to give on the screen as well as offering to. Most of all this morning, though, we want to thank God for God's generosity and God's goodness in our lives. So if you are willing and able, I invite you to stand and sing with us as we sing the goodness of God. church, we praise God, that God's goodness is running after us. So this week, may we surrender, take a posture of receiving the goodness, the gifts that God wants to give you, from peace and hope and joy.